we will be thinking about how to really support small group instruction using the assessment remediation guide. All right, so this is part one of a two-part series. Today we're really focusing in on tier one. All right, we're going to get to introductions in a second. But first, let's go ahead and clearly state our purpose. If I could please have a volunteer read our purpose here in the box.
Set the vision for small group instruction in order to develop a plan to roll out small group instruction to students, maximize student learning and practice during Tier 1 instruction, and support teacher coaching.
Thank you, Mr. Lee.
You're welcome.
Yes, so today we're really going to be thinking through, right, what is the experience we want for students during small group instruction in Tier 1? What does that mean in terms of the support we need to think through? What does that mean in terms of teacher actions? And then the next layer of that is, what does that mean in terms of our role as coach and instructional leaders? On the left here, we have our agendas. On the right, we have our outcomes. You'll see that the outcomes are divided into two, right? What teachers will be walking away from, hopefully, after the session. And then today, what you as coaches will be walking away from after the session. Take 30 silent seconds to read agenda and outcomes and give me a thumbs up on camera when you are ready to move forward. Great. Let's go ahead. Tammy, may I have you start us off, please?
Miss Tammy Woolbright, pre-K through 8 supervisor will be my role, and I guess my word for our early literacy instruction so far would be proud.
I'm Sonia Smallwood, assistant principal at Gainesboro Elementary, and my word is important.
Brian Lee, principal at Dotson Branch School, and my word is imperative.
I'm Deb Searcy, instructional coach for GES K through 3, and my word is enthused.
Stacy Clinton, new instructional coach, emphasizing the word new. But I would say my word would be dedicated.
And Tina Cassidy, principal at Gainesboro Elementary, my word would be improving.
Again, my name is Jose. I am the Director of Instructional Support for the Early Literacy Program at Instruction Partners. And my word for the work that we've done here at Jackson this year is confident. Definitely feel very confident in the direction that that Jackson Schools is taking and focusing in on early literacy because of all of the words that y'all described. And so thank you very much for that quick round of introductions. I'm going to go back to our presentation here. Right. May I have a volunteer? Given our agenda, which essential practice are we diving into today? Thank you, Mr. Lee. I see a 3. Mr. Lee, would you mind coming off mute and sharing your reflections there?
Well, I just started at the top and kind of worked my way down, and I felt like year before last, a vision was implemented of what we wanted early literacy instruction to be. Last year, we implemented the materials portion of that, and I think now that we've had our chance to get our hands wet, so to speak, with the materials, we are using the data and the assessment to learn how to strategically put all of those parts together to get our best bang for our buck.
Yes, and you're gonna when we kind of turn to the assessment remediation guide session later this week, we're actually going to be looking at some mock student data and assessment and really sinking our teeth even deeper in that essential practice. Today, we are going to be thinking through more, we're not thinking about data and assessment, but given that we're really thinking about our Tier 1 materials our tier 1 instructional time, we're really going to be focusing on that essential practice 2, right? Thinking about what is the small group, what do the materials call for the small group instruction to look like? And so we can really maximize that time. And to your point, Mr. Lee, secondarily, how can we really use data to make sure that that small group time during tier 1 instruction is as strong as possible? So yes, 2 and 3 are the pieces that we're going to be looking at today. I'm going to invite someone to start us off that has not yet spoken whole group.
I'll say that when you look at if he was prepared for small group instruction, you can definitely tell it's very well thought out. He has got, his groupings in the classroom set up. He had annotated exactly what he wanted, his expectations in groups, and he even asked students to share them with each other before they began small group. He knew what his early finishers needed to be working on so that somebody's not just sitting there and, get off task. So he had all those set into place, and his groups were based on data, it looked like. So he had obviously analyzed that before putting his students into groups. So very prepared.
One more voice.
The students were exposed to a good model. Several times it's referenced that you will model what is expected.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And I'm just connecting that back to, right, the Read 360 program. How many of us have attended the 360 program this summer? Great. If we remember, right, one of the elements of the principles is, right, being explicit. And, modeling is one way that we are explicit, not only with our academic expectations, but also our behavioral and routine expectations. Great. Thank you, Miss Stacy, Miss Deb, and Miss Sonia for sharing out. Now let's hear from a voice that we have not yet heard. And I'm going to ask us to consider the second question here. Which is, principal, what do you need in order to make sure that students are experiencing a strong, planful tier 1 small group experience?
Well, you need to know what to look for, what the best practices are, and then you need to monitor that, go into the classroom and do observations.
Great. Thank you. Principal Tina.
Yeah.
Great. And today we really are, during our work time, we really are going to be thinking to Ms. Tina's point, right? What tools do we have that are going to support us in our roles to ensure that small group instruction is continuously improving to really maximize the precious time that we have, okay? And so as we are thinking about, right, what do we look for? What a wonderful segue, and thinking about, right, like, let's think about what does this look like? What does this sound like? What does it feel like? And also, what does it mean in terms of our coaching implications? All right. So one thing that, as a student, one thing I heard that Miss Deb shared was that it feels structured, right? That's one way it feels like. What are other kind of in terms of the student experience? What might a student see during small group instruction? What might a student hear? What might a student feel during the small group experience? And we'll go ahead and just whole group this. I'll capture our notes as we're sharing.
I'm thinking maybe like when you go along with feeling as a student would be successful, because it should be kind of based around whatever their level is. So making sure that whatever is in their small group, that it's based on what their need is.
I appreciate that you connected that to, like, right, the teacher implication is that the teacher knows very specifically what skills they're targeting, right? And so then in terms of a coach, that means that we are helping teachers identify, right, what it is that students need. And so let me go ahead and capture that here. And also to the point that you brought up, Miss Stacy, right? Like after you had that data, what the heck do you do with it? How do you use your tier 1 time and right, like leverage your data? And that is something as a coach we need to be clear on so that we can then support teachers in creating that experience for students. So coaches support teachers in data analysis. Great. What about, let's jump back to this idea of it being structured. What does that mean in terms of our role as principals, as coaches?
Sorry.
I was just going to say, I think it looks like I always heard the term the well-oiled machine. And so, you know, you should hear that buzz of the students participating in their small groups. You should see the teacher being the facilitator either of their group that they've pulled or that they're monitoring, like in the notes of the annotations. You could see that the teacher had purposely said, I'm going to listen to my 3s and 4s today. So, you know, there was a definite structure and routine going. But as coaches, in order for that well-oiled machine to happen, we have to support teachers in knowing how to establish those structures and routines and what that looks like and giving them the support, because that is something that I know last year at the end of the year that Deb had spent some time specifically with first grade, and I think that was one of their biggest needs, is just knowing how to set up their classroom and start establishing some routines.
Things sound like you should hear students reading and you know, student-centered, and the teacher should just be facilitating, and then with what like in the example there that we looked at, you know, have the sight word group pulled, and you know, which ties into that well-oiled machine. If it's done right, that's what'll be happening.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Lee. And I layered on to your response, Mr. Lee. Students are reading or practicing, right? We know sometimes they practice in context, which is reading. Sometimes they practice out of context, which is something like sight words, for example. And students need both during small group instruction, right? They may need both. And we need to make sure that students are using that teachers are using aligned materials, right? That what students are actually working on comes from our Tennessee Foundational Skills Core Supplement Guide or is aligned to it. And I think that is a pitfall that we are going to need to look for, right? Making sure that what students are practicing directly aligns with what has been taught.
Jose?
Yes, ma'am.
Could we add, to me, when I see the word, what does it feel like? To me, I think that for the students, that they should feel comfortable in that classroom, that they know what's going on, which is part of structured, I guess. But, you know, you can walk in a classroom sometimes and it just has a real comfortable feeling, like these students know exactly what they're doing. So that was just a word that struck me, maybe, that for the students. And I think they will be, you know, they would lend to being successful. And so as coaches, I think sometimes we can walk into classrooms and know this is the first time they've really done a small group, or you know, they have been doing this. They're comfortable in their roles and what's going on in that classroom. So
I appreciate you saying that, Lucy. I think that, right, like during small groups, because we are thinking about very specific needs, I think, you know, and students learn at different rates, right? And students need to have that growth mindset about themselves. And as teachers, we need to make sure that we are creating a space where students have that growth mindset of themselves. You know, being vulnerable here, I had a couple of students during my second year of teaching that, despite how much I was, giving that targeted instruction, that small group time, they just really weren't making the progress that I needed. And while being observed once, while debriefing an observation, my coach pointed out that I had rolled my eyes a couple of times when practicing with these students, right? And the coach identified that for me and said, why did you do that as a teacher? And I felt frustrated. I felt frustrated they weren't making that progress. And my coach at that time said, what message are you communicating to those students if you are showing your frustration, right? And I think that is something that, perhaps did not create a safe space for those students to learn. And so as adults, as coaches, we have to be sure that we are supporting teachers in all ways, in our body language, in what we say to students, and how we're facilitating instruction, that students feel like, that they're in a safe space to learn, right? Teachers should not be rolling their eyes. They should not be saying things, don't you have this yet? Or you need more practice. We need to make sure that everything that we say and we do is creating a safe space for students. So I really appreciate you sharing that with Cersei.
And maybe that safe space needs to be a part of our checklist, because I appreciate the fact that you named out that vulnerability and shared that you had that reflection with a coach, because I do think if we're all honest, there's classrooms in our district that we do see at times some behaviors with our teachers that we would like to change. The comment that you made about, don't you have it yet? I mean, we've all heard that, in some isolated places. So specifically, that would, that's an area that we could improve upon. I mean, this might go without saying, I guess, but the materials have to be within reach. So, for instance, the early finishers, if they're going to use that Grand's decodable book, you just want to make sure that, it's there, ready to go, whether it's at their desk or if they're in another table or something, that it's already there. So I'm just thinking about making sure that all materials are ready and accessible.
In the beginning of the year, is there any data that could inform small group instruction?
We have I think the only grade that we wouldn't have data on is our incoming kindergarten. And actually, there's some data from them that follows them. Those that have attended pre-K, we should have some Ames Web data on. Those that attended Head Start, we get complete portfolios on that has lots of good data in it. But for incoming first, incoming second, and incoming third even, we're going to have the previous year's end-of-year data from our foundational skills that we gave. And then we also have our end-of-the-year Ames Web. And of course, we know there'll be a summer drop, but still, I think we would have data to form some instructional decisions from the previous year work.
May I layer in an idea? And I really appreciate Ms. Tammy thinking about, right, the previous year's end-of-year data. Right, like, we can't let perfect be the enemy of good. If we start the year off, right, like saying, like, we're going to use our our previous year's data to just get a rough sketch of what groups might be. And then as we get our DIBELS data, as we complete those placement assessments, then we can fine tune those groups, right? I think we can think of, I like the idea of having kind of like an initial grouping, and then those groupings being refined. What I'm hearing is, right, we have some data, we have a lot of data, and we need to provide focus for teachers so that they can be responsive. Right? As a team of leaders, how are we creating that focus for teachers in terms of what data to focus in on? When are we telling teachers, you're going to focus on this data, not that data?
Well, I think it's going to be a shift. I think in the past, it's just been, I guess, emphasized on Ames Web because that's what our focus has been at our data meetings. And so when we made overall instructional decisions for RTI, for grouping, it was a main focus on AIMSweb. Last year, I feel like the second half of the year after Christmas, we put an emphasis on our foundational skills data because we held teachers accountable to, looking at that data, putting it in spreadsheets. We had some PLCs that talked about the trends and the ideas of how they could group some kids. But our next steps would be it actually come into fruition in the classroom. It was kind of like we had conversations and talked about the trends and even grouped some of the kids. But, and Deb, you can speak to this more than me because you were actually in the classrooms. I don't think teachers knew what to do next. So I do think it's a shift. I think we need to communicate at the beginning of the year that, AIMSweb is going to help us kind of group our students overall in their tiers of intervention, but our foundational skills data is going to help us group our students within the classroom during Tier 1 small group and make strong instructional decisions day to day. Where I feel like AIMSweb helps us make instructional decisions big term. Like every 9 weeks, checking in on a student and say, hey, this kid went from the 10th percentile to the 36th percentile. I can take him out of Tier 3 and move him to Tier 2. So that's a big decision, like, at a data meeting. But that happens because if we're using our foundational skill data day to day, then that kid can grow from the 10th to the 36th, let's say. And I'm just throwing an example out there.
Miss Tammy, that was really helpful. One thing that I wonder is, when we think about this experience with teachers, one thing that might be helpful is a simple table that lists the assessments in early literacy program, and next to each assessment tells teachers this is what you do with it, right? So for example, I'm seeing a table that says AIMSweb informs progress monitoring for Tier 2 and Tier 3 students, right? Tennessee Foundational Skills Core Supplement informs small group instruction daily and weekly. And making sure that anytime we look at data, that we start with that information, because to your point, Ms. Tammy, right? We need to build clarity around what is the purpose of these assessments and how do we use this data, or else it doesn't get used. And the impact of that is students will not grow at the rate that we need them to. Right? So right now as a team, let's be thinking about who is within Jackson schools in early literacy that has strong planning for small group Tier 1 instruction, strong management during this time, right? Has student-driven centers. Be thinking about who those teachers are, and let's inventory those teachers.
I think that we ought to add the environment of the setup of the classroom, is that going to fall under culture management, or does that need to be separate? Because we have some teachers, that's where we're going to have to start.
Great. I mean, this is, we definitely, I'll add that right here.
That's exactly what I was going to say. Some teachers, it's going to have to start with how their room is just set up and if it allows for small group.
That's why I think almost creating the checklist at the beginning of this is what we expect in our district, the high flyers are going to be able to look at that and go, yep, I do that, I do that, I do that, I do that, I do that. And the ones that we know that really need the work, they're going to be able to internalize, oh gosh, I don't do this. And then hopefully we can differentiate and provide the support like Deb was talking about. But I almost feel like we're going to have to roll it out as a whole group, and then the coaches support teachers kind of individually wherever they are to meet their needs. Because I agree, we have students all over, and I like the idea that we're going to identify those that have the strengths. So I'm thinking, like, right now off the top of my head, I can't think of any more setup things, but where my head was going now was trying to make the connection between, okay, if we get our rooms set up like they're supposed to, and some of them already are, but those that aren't, this gives them kind of some highlights of what we're expecting. Then the next thing I heard Deb kind of name out was that we have teachers at all different places about their organization and their planning. So on the previous document where you broke it down in 5 spots and we were looking at strong teachers, and we know how we could leverage that strength, whether it's visiting the classroom or video in it or whatever. I'm wondering if creating a survey or some type of document that if we could get the teachers to honestly reflect on those 5 areas of small group instruction to say, okay, I need help in all 5, or, I feel pretty good about my room setup. I feel pretty good about the culture of my classroom, but I need help with student-directed centers. I know we think we know what they need help on, and we probably do, but somewhere they've got to be able to recognize it too. If we can't get them to recognize it, then, I think it becomes us just telling them again. So, and maybe a survey is not the right thing, but in my head, I'm just trying to think, how could we get them to reflect on those 5 things, or maybe name out what they need the most, or maybe that's, I don't know. That was just another place my brain is going.
Amy, I was thinking the same thing, where are you at this point with small groups, and where do you want to be? What is it you need help with? Classroom management, time to plan. Do you need someone I can come in and help model what this looks like, or help them, what is it they need? I think I know what you're saying. Where are you, and then where do you want to be in a certain amount, I don't know how to, if that would be questions, or if they would answer.
To me, what we have to take out of this call, we can have some working documents, but what we had to take out of this call is that we all had the same communication, that going into this year, small group is going to improve than from what it was last year. We need the classrooms set up. We need teachers attempting those lessons to fidelity with small group, and then the coaches have to support those teachers on what that looks like. So I think by the end of this call, we all understand, I heard imperative, which was it Brian that you used imperative? I don't remember. 2 or 3 people really named out how important this is. Well, we know after year 1, our curriculum wasn't as effective as it could be because we're not taking advantage of that small group time. So that's where we have to improve. So, I think our purpose is good at the end, but we can look at this document and make sure that we've got some time built in there.
Would you mind just orienting everybody to this document again, just letting us know what it is, what are we looking at?
So basically what we did is after kindergarten first and second paced out for the entire year, we looked at their assessments and where they fell, and we went in and planned our data PLCs around those assessments and kind of put them in the week where they would fall. And then we went in and also added a math PLC once a month because that was going to be a priority of the district. And then all the dates in between, we tried to put internalization, because as they get ready to do a new unit, they need to internalize that unit. But during that unit internalization, we want to get in the practice of more looking at student work and thinking about, let's say after unit 1, we know what students are having trouble with. So while we're internalizing unit 2, let's go ahead and make notes in certain parts of these lessons that we need to add this or whatever because students were having trouble with their student work. Or small group, let's say. The kindergarten has unit 2 internalization the second week because their unit 1 is really short. So if they have small group in kindergarten at that point, which I don't think they really do, but I'm just using that as an example, then during that PLC, even though we call it internalization, we could hone in on small group and talk about, okay, this is what it calls for. How are you going to plan for this? How might you change it? Like, for instance, your example that you gave Mr. Guadarrama, how he had made notes. Like, that could be part of the internalization process. So, I mean, it could definitely fit anywhere. Then there was a few places we put flex days in because the teachers are always complaining about their time. So we tried to put some flex days in that if there was another topic that came up or a need that they had, then we could hit it there. So there would be a little flexibility. So that just gives you the background of how we created this document. This time, I think Jose gave us to try to figure out what you all need as administrators and the coaches need in order to make sure small group happens in your building. So Deb and Sonia are creating something that will help them to know what teachers need or where their biggest area of need is if they're creating that. But as principals and assistant principals, what do you need from the coaches, or what do you need from us as a district to help you understand small group better or help you monitor it better? Like, what are the things that you need? Because I think that was kind of the purpose of this work time. If you named it out, then we could create it. Obviously, we know the IPG will be one of them because that will help you monitor. We're going to talk about that tomorrow in that short session with Christy Pendergrass. But what else do you think you need to help you be able to ensure small group happens to fidelity and we have better student outcomes?
Are we going to enter that data in a spreadsheet like we did last year?
The IPG data?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the plan.
Okay.
Are we using the IPG that we used, or are we using the one that the state's put out?
We will use the state IPG for foundational skills and for the ELA both.
And I was on, Gary had called, but Tina, what were y'all talking about assessments there?
Do you have the dates of when SchoolNet and MAP is going to be open?
I don't.
Okay.
I don't yet anyway. I can go. It's more flexible. I think we can go in and we can adjust it some. Their big thing is, like, if you test the first week, they want X number of weeks before you test again. Like, right. Theirs is more the distance between tests. So I think we can do it a little different. But
and that's sort of why when we did Ames Web, we would test before Christmas, because there was a bigger gap if we waited till after Christmas, and then between the fall and the winter if we waited till after Christmas.
I think as far as the assessment calendar, I think it's just been different people in different meetings talking about it, but it's never been, hey, we're going to sit down at this point and hammer one out, which is probably what needs to.
From what I remember last year, Audrey said that
let me look and see if
we had to wait about the opening of Ames Web, but for the winter benchmark, I think it opened December 1st. So that would be the earliest.
So when I look at Ames Web, it's September the 1st through October the 15th is the...
for the first one?
The first one.
September the 1st, wow.
Mm-hmm. Unless they change it, but that's the only date I can see.
Well, they must have backed it up last year because we did test at the end of August.
on.
And then when you do MAP and SchoolNet, do you want to? Does it need to be done right away? I mean,
SchoolNet is going to be open all year, so we can choose to do it whenever we want. And they told me they're not going to have windows like they did last year. So I think we can schedule it whenever we want. Now, on SchoolNet, there had been some discussion about not doing the beginning of the year because we have so much data anyway. Like, we could test these kids to death if we're doing AimsWeb, we're doing MAP, and then we're doing a SchoolNet. Plus, we have all the foundational skills data for these second graders going into third grade. So we already have a lot of data on third grade. But our math partner with the core office, they have been adamant that they want that beginning of the year math one done. So then that brought up the question to me, well, if we're going to do math, do we need to do ELA? But the beginning of the year one is off grade level, if you remember. So, I mean, I don't know. What do you all think? Do you think we should do the beginning of the year for SchoolNet for ELA? Or do you think we just do the math because that's what the core is expecting, and then just do the, what do they call them, the one in the middle and the one in the end?
I think whether it's MAP or whether it's SchoolNet, one of them we just need to not do as often before the end of the year, if that makes sense. So I don't know if you wait and do MAP at Christmas, or do it in the fall and Christmas and not do it in the spring, and just do SchoolNet in the spring, or what? That's some of the conversations that I've had with Mr. Shepard as far as the way it went last year and the benefit of the data. It to me, as you get closer to testing, the SchoolNet data is more valuable than the MAP data. And so, but MAP data is more important throughout that first 3/4 of the year getting there to me. And MAP data, we can test MAP starting August the 1st. However, there are no students in there. So, and I think it rolled from, is it one that rolled from Clever?
I think so, Mr. Lee.
So it's not been updated yet, I don't think. I can't find any kids anyway.
Okay.
And it may not until Skyward goes live at the start of the year.
Yeah, and if I remember correctly, we had issues last year getting them in.
All right, team, I'm going to bring our coaches back, and they're ready to present to us what they have planned. And then I'm going to ask for one person to volunteer from this group to explain to them what this group thought through. Who would like to be that person?
That'll be me.
You're very kind, Miss Tammy. All right, here we go. All right, team. We are back together, whole group, and we are going to share out what we got accomplished during this chunk of work time. And I want to be clear, accomplishments also include like more questions, right? Like if we came across more questions to answer, or more specific questions and answer those, I also consider those accomplishments. And so I know that Miss Stacy, you're going to be presenting for your team, and Miss Tammy, you're going to be presenting for your team. Go ahead, as the spirit moves you, whoever wants to go first.
I'll share what Miss Deb and I came up with as far as coming up with a reflection survey for teachers to take regarding the Tier 1 implementation of small group and what they need more help with. But we just thought that we would take those 5 components that Jose had introduced us to at the beginning or toward the beginning and just have them rank them between, 1 being what they are needing the most help with and 5 being what they needed the least help with or something like that. Or maybe 1 being this is what I'm weak in, 5 being this is what I'm strong in, and just taking those and letting them rank those components so that we could get an idea of what they need more help with. So that's kind of what Miss Deb and I had come up with, just creating a survey that looks something like that.
Any questions for that team?
So we spent a little time just going back and looking at the tentative PLC calendar. And just like in first grade, we know small group doesn't come up until Unit 2. We have a Unit 2 internalization that's towards the end of August. And so, or the very 1st of September, I can't remember the date. But so that's definitely like that Unit 2 internalization on the PLC calendar. That could be a place that we specifically hone in on small group instruction. And that PLC could be, dedicated to that. And those first few weeks are about data. So it kind of matches up with our timeline that we could introduce that in that PLC. So that was part of what we looked at. Then also some of the principals had questions about, I told them that tomorrow we're going to get introduced to the IPG. Mr. Lee asked what IPG we're using, the one we used last year or the state. This year we'll be using the state IPG for both the foundational and the regular. Then we started having conversations around assessments because we all have questions about the assessment calendar, and there's been some confusion about that. So I think it's not been created by anybody, and lots of people, we've talked about it in different meetings, but we don't have it on paper. So